So we're going to head into the actual content of the session now. And first up is Tatiana Peña from LISC New York City. Tatiana is our Senior Community Development Officer who works deeply with our community partners on all aspects of putting together a project, underwriting, coming up with financial, the sources of financing, working with our agency partners to bring it to the closing table. So, Tatiana, you're up.
Thank you, Sam. As he mentioned, my name is Tatiana Peña, and I'm a housing officer at the New York City office of the Local Initiative Support Corporation. As you know, New York State real estate process is very complex, and the affordable housing industry is very robust. There's many organizations out there that have a lot of experience in doing affordable housing deals. A joint venture partnership is where you partner with one such organization as co-developer on your project. A joint venture partnership is desirable not only to navigate the development process, but to mitigate potential risks. So in light of this, I'm here to briefly discuss the real estate development process as well as some of the criteria to think about when you take into account a joint venture partner. This list is not inclusive, but meant to highlight some of the issues and processes that have to be accomplished. Beginning with organizational readiness. So self-reflect on your organization. Make sure that you have a decision-making process in place. Make sure that you have staff specifically dedicated to your real estate assets. Take a look at the strength and tenure of your leadership and membership base. I'm going, these slides are going to be on our website, so you don't have to write everything down. Take a look at the finances of your organization. Are they healthy, or is there unmanageable debt? Next, take a look at the property in question. Is it owned free and clear? Are there land use restrictions on the property? Are there easements or zoning restrictions on the property? An easement is the right to cross or otherwise use someone else's land for a specific purpose. And zoning law regulates building use, height, and size. The size of the property, make sure that it's sufficient to build an affordable housing development project. Typically, affordable housing programs are for buildings 30 units or more, but there's always exceptions. Most importantly, make sure that you have an overall vision in place. Is it to sell your property and move elsewhere? Is it to build a new sanctuary and build housing? Is this housing for seniors? Is it housing for special needs populations? Is it affordable housing, or is it market rate housing? Make sure that your organization's mission is in line with this vision. Also, within this vision, make sure you understand what is requirements versus what can be compromised, because you never know down the line, the project could be constrained by design or financial issues, and you would have to make some compromises. Another crucial aspect is community support. Have you engaged key stakeholders in the community board, elected officials? Have you incorporated their input into your project? Now that you have an image of the project you want, the next step is to assemble the development team, beginning with the joint venture partner. The development team is comprised of experienced professionals who use their expertise to take the project from beginning to end. Their qualifications and experiences should be vetted thoroughly. The joint venture partner or co-developer will be an organization experienced in affordable housing development, and they'll take the lead in this development process. The design process will be spearheaded by the project architect, who will help you frame your design concept and develop a plan for the site. They'll do a massing and zoning study to analyze lot size and local zoning regulations to determine the size and shape of the building and the size of the sanctuary and the number of units that can be built. The more units the building has, the more income the project can generate. Both the architect and general contractor will move the project through various government design approvals needed. So next we move on to financing. Securing the financing for the project can involve multiple government agencies and lenders, and government agencies will have programmatic criteria that must be met. Lenders and government agencies will have financing criteria that must be met as well, and due diligence. Some of the due diligence include funding applications and the appraisal. The appraisal determines the value of the subject property, and lenders typically lend only 80 to 90% of this value. The project budget is comprised of the operating and development budget. The operating budget is where you have the projected rents and expenses, which can tell you how much income the project can generate. Once you know this income, then you can see the size of the loan that the project can support. The development budget is comprised of the cost needed to build this project. The developer and general contractor will work together to determine the construction costs. Other costs include soft costs such as appraisal fees and lender fees, and of course there's the developer fees and required reserves. These costs are funded by funding sources, and they include bank loans, government loans, low-income housing tax credit equity, and developer equity. Moving on to environmental, the environmental review consists of engineers analyzing the site and previous uses to determine if any environmental remediation is needed. The government agency also conducts an environmental review to make sure that the project complies with city, state, and federal regulations. Public approvals can encompass anything from a zoning change to a tax incentive, to obtaining a tax incentive for the property. The project attorney will advise on land and title issues, as well as the project organizational structure and joint venture agreement. So once you've gone through all these steps, the project closes on construction financing. This process typically takes 2 years to a couple of years and depends on the specifics of the project as well as the strength of the joint venture partner. At the closing, the construction sources are financed. The construction loan term is typically 24 months for a new construction, with the first 18 months being spent to build the building. And during this time, the lender and government agency monitor the construction process as well as the general contractor, with the last 6 months spent marketing the project in accordance with government regulations, renting up the project, and making sure that the permanent lender's requirements to convert to permanent financing are met. The permanent loan term period is called the operational phase, and the permanent loan is typically 30 years. During this phase, the property management team manages the building by collecting rents and expenses. Having a strong property management company is essential to ensure that the building is run smoothly. And I'll say that again. Having a strong property management company is essential to making sure that the building is run smoothly, because you will be in this for 30 years. So as you can see, the real estate development process is a multi-step process, and there's risks at every turn. Some of these risks could potentially delay or even stop the project. During the pre-development phase, some of the risks include not obtaining financing or not obtaining necessary land use approvals. Costs spent during this phase are architectural, engineer, and legal fees, and if the project doesn't move forward, any costs spent are a sunk costs. During the construction phase, some risks that could happen are they could find bedrock in the soil, or the cost of materials could increase. This could lead to cost overruns and construction delays, as well as insufficient funds to finish construction. Now, these construction costs are part of the project underwriting, and there's even a contingency budgeted, but these overruns are unknown when the budget is created. During the operational phase, if you don't have a good property management team, the building could be poorly managed. And also, in the underwriting, operating costs and vacancy rates could be higher than underwritten. This can lead to insufficient revenues to pay operating expenses and debt service, affecting the return to the developers and investors. Having a joint venture partner and the right development team can help mitigate these risks, as well as navigate through the project milestones. So thank you. This has been a brief overview of some of the considerations in the affordable housing development process, and it's not inclusive, but just meant to be a brief highlight. Now I'll turn it over to Jason Labate of Goldstein Hall, who will elaborate on the joint venture partnership. Thank you.
Can we put it in the holster? Or? Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everybody. This may have been asked already, but I want to get a sense of who's in the audience. So how many people are here representing a faith-based organization or a not-for-profit that owns property? All right. That's about, look like I'm being sworn in. So it looks like it's about half of you. How many of you are developers? Okay, it's good for the other group of people to see who the developers are. Don't be shy. And how many of you are lenders, consultants, other stakeholders in the affordable housing? Okay, so good. Everybody's got a sense of the room. So for those of you that don't know, I guess two things about myself and affordable housing development. Affordable housing development in New York City goes in two waves. Crunch time is June and December. If you haven't checked your calendar, it's December. So I'm running on like no sleep. So if I don't make sense, just stop me. The other thing is I am an attorney. Don't hold that against me. For the law firm Goldstein Hall, we focus primarily on affordable housing, but all manner of real estate and not-for-profit work. And particularly in the past 5 years or so, we have really worked with non-for-profits and particularly faith-based organizations to develop property, both market rate and affordable housing. This workshop obviously focuses on affordable, and I'll just say a brief word about that. So you that are not-for-profits and faith-based organizations know, right, you, unlike a business that has one bottom line, you have two, possibly three, right? You've got to keep the lights on, you've got to stay in the black, hopefully, and you need to achieve mission. And so this is going to be a decision that you're going to have to wrestle with, and it affects the legal issue because your internal decision mechanisms are going, you know, your board, your committees, your pastors, your executive directors are going to have to figure out what it is that you want to achieve. And particularly now, as have been mentioned by all of the previous speakers, affordable housing is a major issue across the country, but specifically in New York City. And so there may be an opportunity to do market rate, depending on where your property is and what can be built. And some cases, affordable housing will give you the biggest bang for the buck, so there's no hard decision to be made there. But you, as an organization, are going to have to decide whether you're going to develop affordable housing because you want to achieve the mission and get the money, or whether you're pursuing market rate. That's a threshold question. Tatiana went through sort of the very broad brush, the scope of what to expect. We should also say, to set the stage, and I have 10 minutes, so I'm going to stick to that, is, right, don't worry about taking notes and don't worry about absorbing all of this. Really, this is just to sort of give you a primer so that you say, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, this is something I need to figure out. And it can't be said enough, right? Whatever you do, whether you're a faith-based organization or you're not-for-profit, one of us wouldn't come in and do your work. We wouldn't start to preach from the pulpit. We wouldn't come in and say, you know, I know how to do harm reduction work, whatever it is. And so development, particularly affordable housing development, just requires partnering with expertise. And so the goal of this is to inform you, to empower you, and introduce you to individuals that can help you achieve your mission. And everyone here is a trusted party, and as discussed, NYLOP is going to have grant opportunities so that you can have funding for a group of you to get this sort of expertise, and HPD has really made an unbelievable effort to approve partners. So to that point, joint venture development, right? So we're assuming on the premise that you are going to partner with a developer that knows how to do this and that you feel good about. So the questions that you're going to have to answer at the outset for your developer, right? Are you going to do market rate, or are you going to do affordable? For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to assume that you're doing affordable. Do you want a not-for-profit developer or a for-profit developer? It may not matter to you, right? But there's slightly different cultures, there's slightly different flavors. Both of them are going to deliver to you affordable housing. Not-for-profit developers, by definition, right, are going to have a double bottom line, and some people are more comfortable with that. For-profit developers are going to have a single bottom line, although, right, it doesn't mean that they're not motivated by social mission. So my firm, for instance, is a private corporation. We're not a not-for-profit, but we are what's called a B corporation, which means that we try to achieve social mission as well as achieve profit. Are you going to have commercial and/or community space in the development? This is going to sort of be dictated by your architect and your zoning, but do you want sanctuary space back? Do you want programming space back? And do you want commercial space, and will the area support it? And Tatiana raised this before. Do you have deed restrictions or other restrictions on your property? So this is something you have to think about at the outset, and this just in, if developers don't know, you should be happy you came here. So a new law just passed by City Council earlier this week for a process on deed restrictions on how it's going to have to be reviewed and approved, specifically through DCAS. It still needs to be approved by the mayor, and I think rules are going to have to be written. But the point is, many of you that received city-owned property may have deed restrictions that say you need to have community use on your property, which means either sanctuary or soup kitchen or other things that serve the community that aren't commercial spaces. And affordable housing frequently doesn't fit into that, and so you're going to need to address that deed restriction at the beginning as a threshold matter to develop. It's so important to know the other hoops that you're going to have to jump through is to get Attorney General approval. So as not-for-profits or religious organizations, right, you are charged with the mission of serving the public. You get advantages for serving the public. Enforcing or overseeing that you're doing that is the Attorney General. And the short is that the Attorney General is going to have to approve any transfer of real property. If you're a religious organization, any transfer of real property, period, end of story, is going to require AG approval. If you're a not-for-profit, the threshold is substantially all of your assets. The things that you're going to need to provide to them are evaluation of the property, so an appraisal, and the consideration that you're getting in return. Frequently, it will be space in these deals, but if it's just a cash deal, that's easier to explain to them, and the certainty with which you're going to get those things. And this is a shameless plug for the attorney. Your attorney will walk you through that. So why joint venture? We talked about this, so I won't spend a lot of time. Right, this is what people do. You wouldn't go to cousin Steve to say, "Hey, I've got this thing on my neck. Would you take it off?" You're going to go to a surgeon. So you want somebody that operates in this space. But not only for your own interest. The reality is in affordable housing, right? It is a very specialized community, and it's almost impossible to break into. So anybody that breaks into this area does so as a joint venture, because you've got state agencies, not-for-profit lenders, equity investors. They all want to see your track record and to know who you are. And the developer, in addition to those things, this is just a sort of roll off of that, will provide access to financing so that you wouldn't otherwise. They'll provide financial strength, ability to provide guarantees, because this is what they do. The guarantees, in large part, of the whole game for this. They'll increase production results, and they bring skill to it. So very quickly, I think I have about 4 minutes left, so I'll just run through this. This is just an overview of sort of how a joint venture might work. So now you've identified who your partner is. You might know what your project is, or roughly what your project is. You need to identify who, right, in the marriage, the partnership, is going to do what. So who's going to have decision making? Typically, the developer will have decision making authority, and you all might have review and approval of the affordable housing component. For if you're getting space, worship space, community space, largely you will have control over that. Financial design and specifics: what does the outside of the building look like? If you're a church, is it going to be obviously a church? Will it be, what side of the street will it be on? Who will select professionals? Development agreements on who, there's something called the developer's fee. How is that going to be paid to you and broken out? Dispute resolution: if things fall apart, what happens? How do you figure that out? Are you forced to come to the table? And then exit strategy. Financial issues that a joint venture partner will help you with. This is just an example. So your 3 stages are pre-development, construction, and permanent. Developer, this is important, so I guess I'll spend 1 more minute on it. You don't want to have to come out of pocket for your pre-development expenses. Your pre-development expenses are your appraisal, your architect to figure out what can be built there, possibly your attorney to see what's on title and if you need deed restrictions changed, et cetera. A joint venture partner or LISC's program here is designed to give you pre-development funds, right? So most of our partners are low on cash but may be property rich. A joint venture partner or programs like LISC or piloting are designed to sort of give you the upfront loans to pay for these costs so you can figure out what you have, be smart about it, and to figure out how to develop. After that, your equity is going to figure out who's going to actually put in the equity, right? Because as Tatiana said, your loan to value is not going to be 100%. You need to figure out who's going to get paid what, and there's this upfront chunk, which is essentially your profit for putting the deal together, which is your developer's fee, your cash flow split, and then who's providing guarantees, and almost certainly that will be your developer. So I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to wrap up quickly. Tatiana discussed operational issues. Just know, again, like development, property management should be done by somebody that works in this space, has done it before, and your financiers are going to require it. And then Lisa will discuss sort of the difference between property management and asset management. And the short is that the property manager will answer to the asset manager. So the answer is always that Lisa's in charge. Important issue, there's a year 15 exit, so there's 2 points that I'll make, and then I'll get off the stage for those of you that are concerned with time and watching me, is one of your sources of financing for affordable housing is something called tax credits. And that is a federal program whereby mostly banks, in return for contributing equity to these properties, get a tax write-off. And banks happen to get more benefits from this because there's things called Community Reinvestment Act credits. So banks typically do this. Those tax credits expire on the 15th year after the program or the project's been put in service. So importantly, from the outset, what you want to be thinking about, right, is we've talked about a lot of stakeholders that are in the deal and at the table. But at year 15, the tax credit investor exit, and the tax credit investor, although is not operating the project, has a 99.9% ownership interest, so they can reap the tax credits. What you want, this is important, typically is the right of first refusal at year 15 for your organization, not for profit, to buy them out, right? So that gives you ownership over the project, and there's specific regulations for that. Guarantees we talked about, so I won't go through that. Just know there's a lot of them, and you shouldn't do them. Your development partner should. And this, now LISC is probably tired of hearing me say this. So this is an org chart, an organizational chart, right, of the legal entities for a tax credit deal. And the point of showing you this to you is not so that it's emblazoned in your memory, it's to scare you. It is very complicated. There are a lot of players. Right, your attorney and will certainly help you develop all of this, but everyone, you know, the developers and the other stakeholders in this room that know this, right, they see this and they're like, oh yeah, they get it instantly, but it takes a long time to sort of get here. So hopefully this was helpful in giving you an overview of, you know, issues to think about. I'm happy to talk more, and being here is the first step in crossing the finish line, or I guess crossing the finish line to get started. That's me. If you couldn't see me from a distance, I don't have any cards. I apologize in advance, but that's my contact information. I'm Googleable. I think we're going to do questions after. Is that okay? Oh, I think they're going to be available online. Is that right? And we're sending them to people that registered, or they're just going to be up on the website?
For everyone who registers, and you will receive an email after with the slides.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm about to. Sorry. Thank you all. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Lisa Deller, who is the, what is your official title? Vice President of Asset Manager for NEF, National Equity Fund. So they're one of the tax credit syndicators that I talked about, and she's going to talk about asset management.
Do you want the handheld or?
Yeah. And if you don't know, this is Grace Chung. Grace has organized all of these sessions. She's done such a great job. Thank you, Grace. So let's see. Okay, good. So my name is Lisa Deller, and I work for what's called a low-income housing tax credit syndicator. And what we do is we raise money from institutional investors in order to invest in your projects. And so the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program began in 1986, and we hope that it continues into the future for a long time to come. But it began in 1986, and it really is kind of the ultimate public-private partnership because, you know, banks and institutional investors are able to gain tax credits, and you get equity for the construction of your buildings, and it results in really tens of thousands of units of affordable housing in New York. And so in partnership with our sister company, LISC, through the New York Equity Fund, we've built probably 25,000 units of housing in the city of New York, in the Bronx, in Upper Manhattan, and in Central Brooklyn primarily. And so, you know, they've been sustainable for many, many years, and it's a huge accomplishment for those of you who've been in the Bronx for generations. You know what it's meant to restore vacant and dilapidated buildings to habitability, and a lot of that was done through the tax credit program. How this works is, and it's not that hard. Jason made it scary, but it's not that scary. So how this works, this is a diagram of how it actually works. So the tax credits are allocated to state housing finance agencies and through the state to the city, and you apply for tax credits. There are rounds of applications that HPD holds. They announce them, and you put in your application. You get points for various criteria in the application, low-income housing, special needs. You know, if you're housing, I don't know, people aging out of foster care, you get credits for all kinds of things. And so it's competitive. So you apply for the credits, and you get an award, and you're also happy. You're like, oh, I got these tax credits. But you can't do anything with those tax credits. You have to sell them. And you sell them to an investor. You sell them either to a private bank, you can sell them to, you know, Chase or Wells Fargo. A lot of them do direct investments, or you can work with an organization like National Equity Fund and LISC, and we will sell those to investors who work with us. And then we become your limited partner, as Jason showed in the diagram. And we work with you for a period of 15 years, and we are charged with asset management. So we oversee how those buildings operate for a period of 15 years. So we said this already, we're the 99% partner, you're the 1% partner, but you're charged with all the day-to-day responsibilities of operating the building. So we only kind of watch from an arm's length. You know, we talk to you, we make, we approve reserve payments and equity payments for things like developer fees. And we work closely with you, and we come out and we do an annual site visit. Compliance is very important in low-income housing tax credits. Everybody has to be income compliant. So if you know, you have to fill out a form every year that says what your income is, and you never have to leave the building. If you go over income, you never have to leave. But when you move in initially, you need to be income compliant. Oops. Okay. Jason said this already about the triple bottom line. You may work with a joint venture partner, and there are some great, there are great not-for-profit organizations in the Bronx, like my friends at NBD and Banana Kelly, and they've been here for 30, 40 years, and they really are mission-oriented, and they're great for-profit partners, like my friends at Trinity, and you know, everybody wants to you know, produce affordable housing. The end result is housing for people in New York who desperately need it, right? And so we're all pursuing pretty much the same goal. And for a faith-based organization and any not-for-profit organization, really, it's about, you know, both physical and financial well-being, and the mission. And so with whomever you work, when you go through this process with LISC, you just want to make sure that your development partner, your JV partner, is really on your side, that they do, you know, they do have embrace your mission. And so, you know, you'll go through an RFP process and you'll work with folks to interview them, and you want to connect because you're like married to them for 15 years at least. I mean, you can negotiate your JV partnership in a million different ways, but you should just assume if you're using low-income housing tax credits that you're really going to be married to them for 15 years. So you want them to be a good partner. And I know from my not-for-profit partners in this room, it's not always a happy marriage. So you really want to make sure that you're all on the same side. And it's your not-for-profit partner, maybe your property management company, it's a team. And that's what Tatiana said. It's really, you know, ongoingly during the operational phase, it's a team approach, and we all want to be on the same team. What is asset management? Everybody feel good about that? Everybody knows what property management is, right? Everybody's got a landlord, and you call someone to fix the plumbing, and you know they come in, and that's property management. What's asset management? You know, asset management is this layer up here. And asset management is really about, okay, it's about stewardship. So, you know, I work in a corporation. I work for National Equity Fund. We're a professional organization. We're charged with asset management. We have various criteria on which we look at the financial and physical sustainability of your project, right? And so we go out, we walk the building, we look at the roofs, we look at the basements, and we do site visits. And quarterly, we're required to report to our investors. And so, you know, you might think, oh, I'm working with Lisa Della, she's such a nice person, she cares about me. And then, you know, I have a bank up here who's asking me a million questions, you know, how come your income wasn't high enough? And how come you have those vacant units? And, you know, what's that in the incident report? And so, you know, I have people who, not only that I report to, but who ask me a lot of questions. So anyway, so myself and my staff are charged with asset management, and we're in communication with you, not constantly, but quite a lot. And Ruby knows this because Ruby works for MBD, and we talk all the time, daily, weekly. We're always, you know, what's going on there, Ruby? But asset management is about goals, right? Strategic goals, and how to attain those goals. And so when you go back and you start engaging in this process of wanting to develop real estate, it's all about pursuing goals. And the goals are to have decent, affordable housing for tenants, to have an asset that produces income for your organization, maybe to have a replacement church space that's new and modern, can expand your parish. And all of these things are goals. And asset management is really about goals and stewardship. So any of you who are on church boards or trustees or however your church is organized, you know about that. Your fundraising goals, you have lots of goals. And so this is really about attaining that. And so your JV partner, you can't always give up, absolve yourself of all responsibility to your JV partner. So you say, oh, okay, I have a JV partner. It's now all their responsibility. It's never all their responsibility. You always have an important role. And so even if, you say, I'm just going to receive cash flow from this building or whatever that is, you want to make sure that you always are listening and watching and having them report to you and take care of, the long-term sustainability of your property. This will be available to you online and in an email, but these are all the criteria on which we look at physical and financial sustainability. So we look at whether you can pay your debt, what your occupancy is like, whether your reserves are funded, how physically fit your building is, how healthy you are as an organization, compliance, et cetera. And as a board of directors in your JV partnership, you'll be charged as the general partner, and your organization probably owns and controls a piece of that general partner entity. And so as the board of directors, as I said, the buck always stops with you. And so I don't know if Jason said this, but you really want to make sure you have directors and officers liability. If anything goes awry, people, if someone sues you, they can always go for someone with the deepest pockets. Not to say that you will be that entity, but you want to make sure you're protected. And so, this is all about your goals. So we talked a little bit about this, the possibility for new revenue streams, providing affordable housing, serving the community. A lot of this you already do, and some of this you can expand your role to do more of. Who else is involved in this? There's a team of thousands. There's your church membership, the board of directors, your partners, the tax credit syndicator, the city, the lenders, the property management company, tenants, community board members, parishioners. It takes a village, right? It takes a village to really make housing like this happen. And when you get into housing world, it's really, you become part of that team. Final word here is you really cannot not do asset management. Either you do it well or you don't do it. And if you don't do it, you have the risk of doing it really poorly. So it's better to create a subcommittee, a team of people who are focused on wanting to oversee the building. So if you have a board, you create a little housing committee, and the housing committee is charged with pursuing these goals. And so that's pretty much it for me. Thank you, because I have 30 seconds left. There are additional training resources available to you. Does anybody know NeighborWorks? NeighborWorks is a fabulous organization that travels around the country, and they do a lot of housing development, property asset management, community organizing, and IROM, Quadell, lots of if you want to talk to somebody about other training opportunities, you could talk to my friend Derek Lovin in the back, because he and his team and Ruby have taken advantage of everything there possibly could be in New York City. So thank you all.
And just before I turn this back over to Sam, who's going to be moderating our next panel, I know some people had been asking about the wonderful slides that our panelists put together. As long as you register, so make sure that you register with lovely Lori at our registration desk, provide you a clear email address. We'll make sure to send out all the PowerPoint slides from today, as well as a video recording, which is happening in the back. So now, without further ado, Sam.
Thank you, Grace. I would like to invite all of the previous speakers to just come back up, so Tatiana, Jason, and Lisa. And I will open it up for questions in a few minutes from the audience. I think I'm just gonna, yeah. Couple of takeaways. There was a lot of information thrown at all of you, and again, don't feel like you have to know it all or walk away knowing it. Partially, it's to the goal of throwing a lot at you is just to underscore how complex and how much there is in this game, not to dissuade you or intimidate you, but to let you know that it's biting off a big thing to step into any kind of real estate development, but particularly affordable housing development, which includes public resources and a lot of eyes on you. As Lisa was saying, it's a cast of thousands. So, our program does take as its premise that organizations that are mission-driven, who don't have real estate experience, the way into this field is through a joint venture partnership. And I wanted to ask as the first question to the panel, how should organizations think about their own readiness to enter into a joint venture agreement? Like, what are some things that you would encourage the audience to sort of self-assess about their organizations before jumping into this big deal?
I'd say good legal counsel, right?
Say that louder, Lisa.
Need good legal counsel.
Hold on. Hello? Is Grace around? Can I give this to Grace? All right. Can I give that one to you while we figure it out? So, you all, as religious organizations or not-for-profit organizations, are corporate entities, right? So you make decisions through your board of directors or through individuals that are delegated by the board of directors. So the short is, right, you need to know whether, or your board needs to decide, and if you have a congregation, your congregation at least needs to be in theory on board for, do we want to do something with our property, and what are the broad goals of that, and what's our timeline? And then I would say the most critical issue after that is delegating a committee, ideally, or an individual to sort of do the day-to-day work, discussing with developers and other stakeholders, like your attorney, like an architect, that's empowered to sort of move the ball forward, and when they reach a decision point, to bring it back to the board. So it's really knowing that this is something that you want to explore, and then knowing that you've got the sort of organization set up to make decisions on this. After that, you really want to know, what property you have and what the restrictions are on that property. But once you make that initial decision on what and who, then the how will sort of fall out as you talk to other stakeholders and do your own due diligence.
Other thoughts about how organizations should assess their own readiness for jumping into something like this?
That's okay. Oh, I wanted to add the whole process of doing an RFP is very helpful, and so
And
LISC
RFP stands for
what's that?
RFP.
Request for proposal or request for qualifications. You can, once you're at a place you really know you want to pursue, and perhaps you get involved in the LISC program, you will have the resources to interview and solicit kind of requests for proposal from various development partners. And one of the things is really comfort. You know, you want to have someone who's going to be a good partner. And so you really want to feel comfortable. You want to do the due diligence. I think it's really about due diligence. Have all your questions answered and never feel shy about that.
And what makes a good partner? I mean, we talked about, and I will get to questions from the audience, so just hold your questions for a minute. But we talked about, you need to find somebody who sort of values your mission, is simpatico. But what are the criteria that would that folks in the room should think about?
Well, personally, you want someone who's going to be a good fiduciary and a good steward of your asset. And, you have both, you have a financial and a mission purpose here. And so, but you can't, some people, we've seen this a lot, and I've done this for 20 years now. And so, you see the mission aspect override the financial aspect. And, for you all, financial piece in this, and I think one sign of a good partner is someone who's going to kind of take you to task, because you might have a very strong mission orientation, but you have another goal here too, and you want to have someone who's going to make sure that they generate that for you. One more thing, sorry, but I worked in property management for many years, and Cheryl Henry's here, and there's some other folks who've worked in property management, and it's the old thing about collecting the rent. You always feel heartbroken when you have to knock on the door and collect the rent, and somebody has, a really sobering story about what's going on with them. And you just want to make sure that, you have the resources at hand to be able to reach out and address some of those issues, and to keep the financial and physical well-being of your building intact. So.
Just on your first question, just going back to what I was saying in my presentation about making sure you have a clear vision for your property, also knowing what part of that vision could be compromised, because you never know what's going to happen when you go down the development road. And then a point on the JV partner, just make sure the government funding process is very complex and very nuanced. And so make sure you have a partner that understands that process and has been through it successfully many times.
So just thinking through the life cycle of a project, you've got pre-development and planning, you've got construction, you have lease up, you've got operations. Is there a typical joint venture structure that kind of cuts across all those? Is there a one-size-fits-all? I guess it's a kind of a leading question, but what are the ways that these joint ventures can be organized, and what goes into even defining the terms of the joint venture partnership?
How much time do we have? So the short answer is there is no one-size-fits-all, right? It's all going to depend on what your property looks like, what your goals are, what your partner's expertise is, and what you're trying to achieve. So to Sam's point, all those stages and phases, it's a Willie Nelson song, I think. All those stages and phases will be contemplated in your joint venture agreement, and your joint venture agreement, will discuss the birth, life, and death. That sounds morbid, but sort of the end or termination of your joint venture. So it will take you through the whole life cycle. And if there are things that your organization has particular skills in, right, social services, if you want this to be a supportive site, which I don't know if we distinguished, but supportive, right, is to special needs populations that might need additional social services as opposed to just affordable housing. If that's part of your mission and you want to be considered or have the right of first refusal for those sorts of services, that might be contemplated in the joint venture. But your joint venture will cover everything from pre-development, let's make sure that this works, let's apply for funding, what does construction look like, what's lease-up management, what are your roles in making those decisions, and how are you informed, and then through the end when the tax credit investor leaves, and possibly your other managing member, joint venture partner leaves.
I know we could spend a lot of time on that one question, but I do want to open it up. Before I open it up, one thing I want to point out, Jason mentioned supportive housing, which is a specialized type of affordable housing that integrates both affordable housing with supportive services for populations that typically would be homeless but for supportive housing. So that is another layer of complexity on top of building the building, getting the service dollars in. And I want to point out Robin Pagliuccio from Supportive Housing Network of New York. So if you're interested in pursuing that, you should definitely speak to Robin, and she has a whole set of resources around that. So I do want to open it up for questions. A couple of quick ground rules. I know we have developers and consultants and other folks in the room, but we want to, because we have limited time, allow for the mission-oriented organizations who are considering this joint venture notion to be the ones asking the questions. So the rest of you, we will have time for sort of networking and for you guys to speak to each other, but we want to focus it on that. If you're asking a question, please give us your name and your organization. Reminder that questions are short and they end with a question mark. So with that having been said, do we have questions from the audience? Yes. Oh, let me bring you I guess we have our Phil Donahue over here. Yeah.
I'm Lynn West from the Presbytery of New York City, and we have roughly 100 churches here in the 5 boroughs. I want to know, we were said in the beginning that you need to choose. Do you want to sell and walk away, or I guess the other choice is retaining some amount of ownership? If you want to sell and walk away, is there any role for joint venture at that?
I mean, the short answer is yes. It can come in any flavor that you want, right? So if you wanted to just sell your property but wanted some control over the affordable housing property because you wanted to serve populations, or you want the right of first refusal, as we said, at year 15, an affiliate of yours to sort of step in, and every affordable housing development in New York City needs what's called a not-for-profit sponsor. And so you absolutely could fill that role, whether or not your developer partner is a not-for-profit. So absolutely. So I guess, right, it's a misnomer to say selling and walking away. It would really be, look, we want to cash out, but we want to be involved in the achievement of the mission of the project that's there, and that absolutely could be done. Remember, right, the pie is only so big, so typically you may have to give up some cash consideration if you're going to have rights down the line, because taking ownership of the property at year 15 has a value to it, and that'll be factored in.
Could you also talk about a land lease?
Oh, yeah. So quickly, right, your 2 big options for conveying your property are a deed, which is, right, it just says here, you now own my property, or you own this property for eternity. The other is, sorry, that consideration will be paid at one time, typically when the property transfer occurs, unless you have a note that would be paid over time. What is increasingly attractive for many not-for-profits and religious organizations is a ground lease. A ground lease enables you to retain ownership of the property, but for a period of years, typically north of 60, 99 would be common, 99 years. And for that period of time, the developer, which could be you and the developer, has the right to construct and maintain the property on, or the building on that property. And typically, for many of our not-for-profit and religious organizations, that's helpful because it's a backstop against spending all the money at once. So you can get all the money in and say, look, we really need a super church van, and then the money's gone. But if you have a land lease, the money's going to come in year after year after year, and so it sort of it's like a long-term endowment. And it also ensures that the property will come back to you at year 99, for argument's sake, regardless of what the deal terms are.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Akel Sylvester, New America Chamber of Commerce, and I just wanted to know if, like a real estate company has to follow the same exact guidelines as the faith-based organization and the non-profit organization as well. Real estate company, you understand?
Are you talking about like their fiduciary obligations, like and maybe I can hand this off. So really quick, if you're talking about like what the laws governing them are, as a general matter, not-for-profits and religious organizations have somewhat different set of laws. But if you're talking about how they fit into affordable housing and will they be treated any differently, the short answer is no. For-profit or not-for-profit developer are all going to go through the same steps in this process.
Next question? Yes.
I'm from Trinity Place Shelter. I'm from Trinity Place Shelter for homeless LGBTQ youth and young adults. And what I wonder is if we were to have a property for supportive housing for 10, is that too small for any of this? And what would be the limit, or the lower limit?
So threshold numbers for wanting to get into the development game.
10 is kind of small for tax credits, for low-income housing tax credits. I don't know, did you want to answer that question for supportive housing? You could.
But there are other funding options to do something at that lower range, like the state HHAP funding or the HPD supportive housing loan program would certainly be willing to fund at those lower levels. So I'm happy to chat with you afterwards.
And I think just another sort of follow-on question is, okay, so I'm a mission-based organization. I have a piece of property. How do I begin to dimension what's even possible on the site? What goes into kind of understanding? Is it 10 units or 50 or 100? You know, sort of what's the first step in that process?
Well, I mean, you will have, you know, if you participate in the LISC program, you apply and you become part of it, you know, you'll look at the lot size, you'll look at what you want to accomplish there, how many units you want to build, what the zoning is, what you can build, and you'll have architectural assistance, and you know, that'll help you to determine what's feasible on a site.
And also the funding program the size of your building will determine the funding that is available. For example, bond deals are typically the larger buildings or scattered sites like 100 units or more. 9% deals are typically smaller, like 40 units, for example. And then below 30 units, there's funding programs like the HPD PLP program, that's the participation loan program, and then other supportive housing programs that you were mentioning. So it all depends on the funding requirements as well.
Sorry, and this is my moment in the talk to give the cautionary tale. So many of our faith-based clients get very excited about development and run out and spend $20,000 on beautiful architecturals for what they want built there. Please don't do that. What you need essentially is a very brief zoning study from an architect. Frequently they'll do it on spec, or your development partner or a potential development partner can do it, and you can figure out what can be built there. But you should not be spending money on architecturals, because all the stakeholders that we've discussed are going to want it to conform in some way, shape, or form.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
So, we've alluded to a couple times. Thanks. We've
Just introduce yourself.
Sorry, John Flack, Our Savior's Atonement Lutheran Church in Washington Heights, 189th and Bennett Avenue. You've alluded a couple times to a new administration coming in. How worried are you about these tax credits and tax programs surviving?
Not it.
You know, there's been a lot of discussion about this, and I'm not going to say go look on the internet, but I'll say National Equity Fund is tax credit syndicator. It's a concern for us. We don't believe that the tax credit program is going to go away. It might be that the prices that people are seeing getting paid per credit now are north of $1, close to $1.20 for every dollar of tax benefit that an investor gets. And so we're looking to see, the corporate tax rate. It's very sensitive to the corporate tax rate. So the corporate tax rate is now 35%, and they're looking at what the options are if the corporate tax rate goes down to 25% or 20%. And, we're building in contingencies around that issue. There's a lot of bipartisan support for the tax credit program. It's actually a permanent program, so that it's not really subject to annual funding, like New Markets tax credit, if you know anything about that, or historic tax credits. Those are some kinds of credits that can go away. So we believe that the tax credit program isn't going away. We just think pricing may change. Jason, you have anything to say about that?
No, but just point of reference, right? So the low-income housing tax credits passed under Ronald Reagan. It was in 1986. So, it's a tax credit, so it has support on both sides. But to the point of, and it's based on the census, what the allocation is per state. So I think that this is unlikely to change. The other side of the equation, though, which is not the tax credit side, right? The block grants and other funding sources that support affordable housing. Given this, the federal administration and particularly appointment at HUD, it's unclear what's going to, what the ramifications for those sorts of subsidies will be.
But I guess the takeaway is don't stop thinking and dreaming and planning around this, because there's a lot of uncertainty right now, but eventually it'll be less certain and the industry will figure it out and respond. And that's some time away, as is, I guess, a lot of the projects in this room are still in that early stage planning process. So I wouldn't say give up on the thinking about it. This will all, sort itself out, and we'll figure out how to respond.
Yeah, it's not going to go away. It just might change.
Yeah. Other questions? I think we have time for maybe one more. Yes?
Okay. My name is Augustina Williams. I'm from Greater Zion Baptist Church, and we do own property. And our whole thing is how to get started, how to begin, how to know what's the right thing to do as far as when it comes to non-for-profit organization, whether or not you're going out of that barrier if you develop certain things. Right. So we need help on how to get started. I heard you talk about forming a committee to find out exactly what you want to do in a joint venture. Would that joint venture cost us any money? Because we don't have that much. We have property that we own, but we don't have that much money to invest in anything.
Right. So you've come to the right place.
I figured that.
So, we will get into the details, and Grace will sort of talk at the end of the session about our NYLOP program, the New York Land Opportunity Program. But essentially what we've done is we've identified this issue that we have a lot of churches and other mission-oriented organizations that have the asset, but they just need to figure out how to get started. And you're not going to walk away from this, training session with all the tools you need to do it. You're going to need to have some support over time to figure it out. And once you get to a point where you've got a joint venture partnership where they have a financial stake in seeing the project happen, then your partner will likely do some of that initial investment on getting the architects and the contractors on board and moving it along. So this is kind of like the pre-development gap. And that's what HPD came to LISC to say, can you help us with this? And so that's the program we've put together. We've gone out to philanthropy to fund it so that we can provide these resources for free. But we can only provide it to a limited number of groups. So we're going to have to go through a process where folks apply and give us a sense of where they are and what they've got, and we will sift through those and find a handful of partners that we can work with over the next year. We'll talk more about those details at the end, but the issue that you're facing is exactly what we're trying to address with this program. And again, can't help everybody, but we're going to come up with a process to do that.
And for those, I mean, this is an unprecedented, unbelievable program that they're launching in terms of the pre-development process. But to Sam's point, it's not going to be available to everyone. And I should say as an outset, not everybody's going to have the ability to do something with their property, right? Just because you have property doesn't mean that you can develop something there. But the other thing that I'll say is for those that fall in the gap that might be able to do something but don't aren't fortunate enough to be a recipient of the grant, is many of the stakeholders in this room or that have been mentioned will give a certain amount of assistance sort of gratis, pro bono. Particularly developers. I can speak for my law firm and myself. An hour worth of sort of assessment of your property, and an hour is a rough estimate, but initial discussion to figure out what you have, what the steps are, something that we do without question to figure out if there's something there, and then we figure out a pricing strategy that works for you if there is something there. Same thing is true of architects and other stakeholders. They'll give you a certain amount to figure out if there's something there, so that you can have an informed conversation, and then you can figure out what your next steps are. But you should not A, have to come out of pocket, at least initially, and B, do not, again, this is one of my other cautionary tales, do not be rushed into anything. Somebody says like, no, you got to sign now, and then I can give you pre-development dollars. That person should not typically be a trusted person.
So I'm sure there's a ton of other questions. What we're going to do is just move on to the next piece, and there will be time to keep the questions going. Can we give a huge round of applause to our panelists?